Welcome to Words, where we talk about the stories that define us and why they work so well. So this week we're going to talk about a couple of Oscar-nominated films because if you're like me, you're pretty excited about the Oscars coming up in March and keen to see who takes home the big prizes. The first one I'm going to talk about tonight is Banshees of Inisherin. Damn it. Should I say this week, not tonight? Because people could be watching it anytime, right? So this week is better. Doesn't matter? So the week is better?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. The first one I'm going to talk about this week is called The Banshees of Inisherin. Inisherin. The Banshees of Inisherin. The first film I want to talk about tonight is The Banshees of Inisherin, which is a screenplay by Martin McDonagh, who is an Irish playwright, and he's well known for his stage plays as well as the films that he has written and directed. You might be familiar with a number of his movies, such as In Bruges. He also wrote 3 Billboards in Ebbing, Missouri, and 7 Psychopaths. And his latest one, Banshees of Inisherin, has been nominated for a massive 9 Oscars, which is pretty incredible. Banshees of Inisherin is a movie about a conflict that develops between 2 characters. Colin Farrell plays the character Parrick, and Brendan Gleeson plays the character Colin. And these 2 guys have been friends for a long time in a very small, isolated community on the island of Inisherin, off the coast of mainland Ireland. The effect that this breakdown of the relationship has on the people that surround them becomes kind of the substance of the story, and also the effect it has on the 2 characters themselves. It's been nominated for a bunch of awards: Best Actor for Colin Farrell, Best Supporting for Brendan Gleeson, Best Supporting for Barry Keoghan, who plays Dominic, and also Best Supporting for Kerry Condon, who plays Siobhan, Colin Farrell's character's sister. Best Directing, Best Screenplay, Best Film, Best Score, and I think Best Film Editing. So a slew of nominations for the Oscars, 9 in total, which is actually enormous, and it's exciting to see what will happen. He also was nominated for a bunch of Golden Globes, and it'll be really exciting to see what happens at the Oscars as to the films he's competing with and what will happen there. Now, there's a number of reasons why The Banshees of Inisherin is so good. And if you have seen In Bruges, which is one of his older films, then you would understand that he is kind of a master of this dark, tense relationship between 2 central characters. And the great thing about Banshees of Inisherin is that he has brought back those 2 main actors that played those 2 characters, Brendan Gleeson and Colin Farrell, who are themselves veterans, brilliant at their craft. And they are just as good in Banshees as they were in Bruges. He develops this incredibly tense but comedic plot that ends up being quite dark but also kind of light, and he's so good at doing this. And I want to look at why his films and his plays are so effective and how he makes that work. And the first thing I want to talk about is his dialogue. His dialogue is, of course, kind of the bedrock of his stories, and that's kind of obvious, being that he is a playwright first and foremost and a screenwriter second. So a lot of his films actually feel and read and play like a stage play. And that means that they are kind of concentrated on a core body of several characters, not a big cast, usually 2 main actors with a few supporting actors and a bit of an ensemble cast around them. And this makes the dialogue so important because it's really about what unfolds between the characters that we're so interested in. And Martin McDonagh is so clever in his use of repetition to create comedy and also to create layers of meaning. And when we are first introduced to Colin Farrell's main character, Parrick, it's with this repetition of this idea that he's rowing with a friend and he can't really understand why his friend suddenly doesn't want to talk to him. And we have this exchange that reveals so much about who Parrick is and the other characters that he's talking to, that it's really so brilliant because Martin McDonagh does it with such a limited vocabulary and such a small number of words. So dialogue really carries the whole story and the whole film. That's not to say, though, that the visuals aren't incredible, because it is beautifully filmed on this gorgeous island, I assume off Ireland itself. And the scenery really does wonders, but it is the dialogue that really tells us what's happening and moves the plot along and shows us who these characters are. The second thing that Martin McDonagh does really well, as I've mentioned already, is the dark comedy. He manages to create these stories that keep us on the edge of our seats, but also elicit out loud laughter. His characters are larger than life and they're full of lots of different dynamics, and they're very emotive and they're often quite confrontational, but in in very different ways. And he's done exactly the same thing in Banshees. And he's created this beautiful tension between Brendan Gleeson and Colin Farrell. And it's incredible, again, to see Brendan Gleeson playing yet another kind of surly, hard to read character. And yet it is a completely different character to the character he played in Bruges, and has a completely different effect to us as the audience. And he's able to convey this with such subtle, quiet tension, and also a little bit of eccentricity, because his character is actually a musician who's trying to write some music, and a little bit of kind of quirkiness comes out along the way. What happens is this darkly comedic vibe exists between the two characters, because they're both a little bit quirky and they're both a little bit tense, and they're having this kind of relationship breakdown in a very small community, and it has a really powerful effect on the people around them. In true Martin McDonagh style, he kind of takes things to the extreme. And one thing I've noticed about Martin McDonagh is he kind of tends to favor a certain type of violence in each of his different stories. In Bruges, it's the gun. In Hangman, it's the noose of the hangman. And in Banshees of Inisherin, it's something else altogether, and I'll let you discover that when you watch it. But it is quite confronting, and it has a very emotive, very confrontational effect on the audience. And it serves to heighten the tension, but also heighten kind of our disbelief as to, like, are these characters really going to go this far? And he manages to do that by the stakes of his comedy as well. The third thing Martin McDonagh does is his use of foreboding, premonition, and symbolism, and he kind of wraps all these things in together. And what that means is often at the start of his stories, there is something that we see as the audience that kind of hints at something intense that's going to happen along the way, something that's going to be of consequence to the characters and be really important in the climax of the film. And in Banshees of Inisherin, and in Banshees of Inisherin, it actually happens really effectively with the supporting character of Dominic, who's played by Barry Keoghan. I think I'm saying that right. Barry Keoghan, who was himself nominated for an Academy Award for supporting actor. And he is truly brilliant at playing Dominic, who's a younger member of the community, but he wants to be friends with Colin Farrell, but he's also unsure about that character's motivations. And when we're introduced to Dominic, it's with this prop, and he's carrying a stick with a spear on it. No. When we're introduced to Dominic, it's with this prop, and he's carrying a stick with a hook on it. And he actually says to Colin Farrell's character, I wonder who would want this. Like, what is this for? Like, I wonder who would use a stick with a hook on it. So Martin McDonagh really blatantly draws our attention to this object. And we kind of forget about it right until the end, and the threads are kind of coming together, and we kind of understand where he's going with this. And it actually becomes really significant to that character's arc and where he ends up at the end of the story, and also what happens to the community as a whole. And it's a very, very clever way of using symbolism and foreboding premonition to really drive the narrative forward and bring those things to a bit of a bookend. We also see that in Bruges with the use of the gun, but also particularly with the clock tower that they try to climb at the start, and then at the end that comes back. And in the Hangman, it's very clearly illustrated by this hangman's noose that's hanging in a closet kind of to the side of stage. The Hangman isn't a film, it's actually a play. So if you have any access to live play streaming platforms, I recommend you check it out. It's incredible. So yes, the hangman's noose as a symbol in the Hangman is also very powerful. A hangman's noose in a closet. That's wrong on a number of levels.
I know what it is.
All right, moving on. So the fourth thing that Martin McDonagh does really great is he kind of adds this layer of fabulism or myth or kind of fantastical element to his stories. So there's always a moment that's a little bit heightened, a little bit surreal, a little bit more beautiful or poetic or on a different kind of plane than the rest of the story. And in Banshees, he's kind of represented by this character that is, it turns out, the Banshee of Inisherin. And that character kind of comes up throughout the story, and it's only in kind of retrospect that you really see what's happening there as he develops that plot line. And really, the Banshees of Inisherin is the title of the song that Brendan Gleeson is writing. So it's kind of drawn through the plot as well as part of the overarching narrative. And in the score, and I know that Carter Burwell, the composer, has actually been nominated for an Oscar as well. The music is incredible. And I know Gecko, and I know that Carter Burwell has actually been nominated for an Oscar as well. The music is truly incredible. It's blending this choral and this orchestral, all these different layers of sounds to create quite an ethereal backdrop that's also really kind of relevant to what's going on, and also to Brendan Gleeson's character's composition. So the music is incredible, and also the cinematography. At the start, we're kind of brought into the island through the clouds, and at the end, we kind of come back out again. So the whole story has this kind of fable-like quality to it, as if maybe it's real, maybe it's not.
It also does that through the continued reflection of the mainland and their...
That's really true. Okay. Yeah, I've just been reminded by my producer that there's another element, a really incredible element to the film where it's paralleled. It's actually set during the Irish Civil War. And so it's paralleled by the conflict. The conflict between these two characters is paralleled by the conflict that's happening on the mainland of Ireland. And the incredible tension there is that a lot of the characters on Inisherin don't seem to really care that much about the conflict that's happening on the mainland while people are dying and being executed. And there's kind of like this morbid reference to that. And it's almost like Martin McDonagh is making this underlying point about how domestic kind of issues really tend to absorb us a lot more than what's actually going on in the wider world. And it's kind of a beautiful parallel there. And it also makes us feel quite separate to the real world, because this island is quite rustic and it's quite removed and remote. So we do also feel this kind of fable, mythic-like quality to the story. The last thing I want to talk about in relation to the Banshees of Inisherin is the incredible way Martin McDonagh blends his themes through his work. And as I've mentioned, his work does tend to be quite violent. It can be quite dark. It's also very funny. It's very articulate and intelligent without being too overbearing in its language, and this really clever use of symbolism and fatalism and this mythic kind of sense to his stories. But he really does tell the stories of human nature, and he tells very human stories between just a really limited cast of characters, but they actually have this reference and this reflection to society. And what I really like to think about this movie that a lot of reviewers haven't really picked up on at all, and they certainly haven't majored on it, that I think is actually the central theme of this film, is actually the tension between this idea of art and life. So what we've got here is we've got Brendan Gleeson's character who wants to pursue art, who wants to write something meaningful, to compose something beautiful with the time that he has left. And so he's chosen to kind of sever ties with his friend Colin Farrell so that he can do that with his remaining time. Whereas Colin Farrell, all he can really see is that his friend has kind of left him, has kind of, without really any warning or any kind of indication that this is going to happen, he's just kind of severed ties. And so you have this very domestic drama happening on one side and this quest for beauty and art on the other. And so I can't help but feel like Martin McDonagh is asking us to consider the tension between those two things, between creating something big and long-term and kind of enduring and a legacy, and art that kind of influences and impacts us on a larger scale, and that conflict between those concepts and the concept of domestic life, and about how those things kind of seem to conflict, but also they really seem to reflect on each other and inform on each other. And I think that is a really important theme. And I think that if you look closely, you'd actually see that coming through in a number of Martin McDonagh's works as well. So more on that theme is Brendan Gleeson's character chooses to kind of self-sabotage in a bizarre kind of way that's also trying to send a message to his friend, but it's never quite explained why his character does this or the purpose that it has. And I'm not going to spoil the movie for anyone, but it's a really interesting comment on the toll that art plays, and also the way we tend to kind of encourage ourselves or to sabotage ourselves in equal measures. Very interesting the way Martin McDonagh kind of explores that. And it's at the end, it's kind of left with us to kind of really work out what we think about that. Martin McDonagh is quite a prolific playwright. He's been very influential. Marlon James, who won the Booker Prize a few years ago for his novel A Brief History of Seven Killings, credits him as kind of inspiring him to this idea that violence can exist inside works of beauty. And he said that a play by Martin McDonagh was the first time he'd heard gunshots live in live theatre. And that was obviously very impactful for the young Marlon James. And it's gone on to really inspire another really significantly great work of art. And if you Google him, you'll find out that he's actually quite attractive and not all that old. So, Martin, if you're watching this, I like your work. So the Banshees of Inisherin, I recommend you see it if you haven't already. It is confronting, it is funny, it is beautiful, and I hope that it is acknowledged for the quality of performance that it is. If you enjoy Banshees of Inisherin, be sure to check out the rest of Martin McDonagh's canon, especially his films, which have all really been nominated for some kind of award, and his plays, if you can access them. Contemplate the dark but funny things of life. That's all we have for this week on Words. I'm Elise James. Thank you for joining me, friends. I don't know, is that a good sign off? If you enjoyed this, please do follow us on all the socials. The links are at the bottom, and make sure that you like and subscribe, and we will see you next time. Thanks. Is that all right?
Right.